Dr. Harlan. And by the way, the only real Dr. Harlan was my mother. So.
Well, there you go. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Harlan, for the invite, and to the whole HMF team. It's really a pleasure to be here. I really enjoyed the talks this morning, and hopefully can tie some of that in. So my name's Greg Harlan. I'm a pediatrician. I'm in Los Angeles. I don't have any disclosures. And I'm hoping that today I can tell you a little bit of our story that started about 8 years ago, and you can hopefully learn from that. We've tried a lot of different things, and some have worked, some have been okay. But I think we're in a good spot, and I hope to share that with you. So 3 learning objectives by the end. First, I'd like to describe how our institution has really embraced nutrition education and tried to incorporate that into our curriculum. And then also, hopefully inspire you to become a nutrition champion in whatever environment you're already working. And also encourage you to reach out to others in other disciplines. I know there's a lot of RDs here, a lot of physicians, chefs, medical students. So we all need to work together more closely. That's my punchline right there. And then talk about ways that we've incorporated using the Health Meets Food curriculum that we started last year. So I broke the talk up into 6 parts. So I'm going to start by talking about how we've involved our students. And students are really the best drivers of many of our programs. Then I'll talk about some of the electives that we've offered at our school, and then how we integrated nutrition into our core curriculum, which has been a challenge, but we've made some progress. Then we'll talk about the community members and partnering with our dietitians, and then how COVID really influenced our remote learning. And then I'll finish with kind of where we are currently and where we're heading. So no talk is complete without the thank yous. At the beginning, I started putting these at the end, as everyone does, but I wanted to start with that because part of the names here, and there's more to add, are some of my colleagues. So Jo Marie Riley and Isabel Edge run our primary care program, and they've been partners in nutrition promotion. Dr. Wallace and Dr. Beal helped with an online course I'll tell you about. Dr. Bennery, Nash, and Elliott are deans of curriculum who have really helped to shepherd things into our actual program at the school. And then Shireen Chow is a wonderful dietitian who really helped introduce me to how to do hands-on teaching in the community. We're fortunate to have a teaching kitchen at our wellness center. So at the hospital where we work, it was called LA County or LAC+USC Medical Center. Just changed the name to LA General a month ago. So we have a wellness center that we're really fortunate to use their teaching kitchen. So our journey started, I joined USC in 2014, and in 2015, a student sought me out and said, I heard you have some interest in nutrition. I went to Cornell, is what she told me, and I am sad that there has not been any nutrition in my first semester of medical school. And I said, oh, well, is that so? And she said, yeah, so I've heard that you're the person to come talk to. And I said, how did you find me? She said, well, I've asked around and I heard you're in pediatrics and you've been promoting healthy habits and you have some interest. And I had actually done some nutrition research in my own medical school training. And she said, I would like you to be my advisor. I said, okay, tell me what I'm advising you on. She said, everyone has to do a required scholarly project. And I would like mine to make the case of that we need more nutrition at the school. So where we landed was a needs assessment. And this was, I think, a great starting point to actually ask students, how comfortable are you with nutrition concepts? What's your confidence? What are your attitudes? And what skills do you have? And so this was the first paper that we published, which was called, Is there a relationship between medical students' personal lifestyle behaviors and their knowledge, confidence, and attitudes towards nutrition care? And the punchline from this was that students who were working out or paid attention to their nutrition felt more comfortable in their own health, but also in counseling patients. And others felt completely out of water. And so the call was to not only incorporate nutrition into the curriculum, but also to make it hands-on learning. So that kind of set the stage. The second year after that, or actually now it's a year and a half, so 2017, we started a selective. And so for any of you in education, oftentimes I found the easiest place to start is something that's optional for a small group of students. So we had 16 students in a hands-on cooking class at a local partner called LA Kitchen. And this is a picture of us with a chef and then all of these very diligent students who they're actually quite scared. Even though you look in this picture, they look like they're very confident. They were really scared. And we said, well, why are you so scared, right? And they said, we have no idea what we're doing. I said, well, is that so? Okay, so I'll tell you what happened. So this is myself, our chef, Shireen Chow, and the first class of 16 students. And LA Kitchen actually is closed now, but at the time was a nonprofit that had as their mission to help folks who are graduating from foster care or graduating from prison to come out and have chef training. And so as part of the chef training, we partnered with them to help have their chef trainees alongside our medical student trainees. And it was a 6 session, so 2-hour sessions in the afternoon, 6 weeks in a row. And this was our first kind of community or culinary medicine program. And the part I remember most was one of the chefs came up to me and said, "Doc, I can't believe that your students don't know how to break down a chicken." And I said, well, why are you so surprised? And they said, well, they're telling me all about the anatomy of the heart and everything else they just dissected, but they have no idea what they're doing with this chicken. And so it was really beautiful to see 2 people working alongside. And this is where I realized there was this power of community sharing. We also, just one note on this as well, is we were approached by our local marketing group, the USC News, to put out a story. And I was kind of ashamed to say, well, you don't have to cover us. I'm sure you have something else. And she said, no, I want to come to one of your classes and just document what happens. And that was one of the best things. So I would also encourage you, if you're at all thinking, well, we need some publicity, is to find someone local, because it's great for them to have a story as well. And because of this, other people started reaching out. So there was another group called Food Tank that then reached out and said, we'd like to do a very similar story. You can see it here, The Power of Food, our new course on culinary medicine. What I also found about this is that if you have something that's already out there, an online story, it's very easy to send that to someone to share what you're doing. Because I would get into very long discussions to explain everything, but found that just sharing a link and letting them look was another nice way. And you can see here, it's hands-on. We were making some oatmeal and chopping up fresh apples. We had a quiz for them, and I just loved being in the kitchen with them. So another paper I mentioned, we have a required scholarly project, a student that was in my own group. So in addition to being in pediatrics, I teach in the Introduction to Clinical Medicine course. So that's a course for 1st and 2nd year medical students to learn history taking, physical exam skills, and inter-patient relationship. And so Brandon, who is a student of mine, said, we're working with LA Kitchen. I would love to try and do something scholarly about this. So we partnered with someone who had some expertise in qualitative research, and we ended up publishing the second paper, which was hands-on community skills, but really in a community partnership. So this paper highlighted the partnership with the community. What you see here is one of the quizzes that we developed to try and assess some of the nutritional knowledge. So in our core curriculum, as I mentioned, Zoe had asked me, we have nothing in our curriculum. We were able to start with 5 hours in our curriculum, which doesn't seem like that much, but we had to fight like tooth and nail to get into the medical school curriculum. So as of now, we have 3 hours of lecture, and you can see the topics here: clinical nutrition, common diets, and we would give case studies, and then vitamins. And what's interesting about this is that vitamins is the one thing that's really tested on the national boards, the medical exam. So that's what many of the question banks that we found drew on. So we had to make our own cases for other questions. And then I lead a session around problem solving, which you see here, the topics like reading a food label or working with the MyPlate counseling, hidden sugars. All of those are not very tested on the medical step 1. I hope they will be at some point, but part of the pushback was people saying, this is not that testable. So I don't know if you've had that experience, but then it makes you think, okay, how do I make this value proposition that this is important? I also mentioned I run the ICM program. So in our 2nd year, we developed a case where students could interview a patient. We use standardized patients, so actors who portray a case, and had to practice nutritional counseling using motivational interviewing. So every time I mention that, someone says, oh, you mean like Kramer in Seinfeld, when he's a standardized patient. Different case, but the same concept. So then came COVID in 2020. And as I was looking back, that was one of the best things that happened for us in the nutrition part. And the reason I say that is because our deans came to us and said, we have a lot of students who can't go to all of these outside sites for clinical practice. We need some other things for them to do. Would you be able to convert what you were planning to do in person into an online course? And we didn't really know how to teach online at that point, but we figured it out. So we used the ACLM, American College of Lifestyle Medicine curriculum, and I'll tell you a little more about that, but basically put together an elective for 4th years. And I partnered with 2 others. So Elizabeth Beal is an endocrinologist. She's ACLM trained, and she came back really fired up about the curriculum. And the curriculum is Michelle Hauser, who's a chef out of an internal medicine doctor out of Stanford, had authored this with ACLM. And Robert Wallace, who had also recently done the training, was a retired OB-GYN who I had practiced with and was teaching with. And he was an alum of our school. And so part of the power was, he said, I really want to give back and be part of teaching the students. And he's also a kind of side master chef, so he's done a lot of chef training. So the 3 of us partnered as the physicians on this course, and then we worked with a number of dietitians. And you can see what I put here, that there was a fair amount of turnover. So we thought that there was going to be really easy partnerships with our dietitians, but we ended up working with 3 different dietitians, and 1 left, and then someone could no longer support the program. So it underscored to me that even though you plan for some of these classes, you have to make sure you have some contingency plans for who can teach. It's very labor intensive. So the methods you see here, that we had 10 hands-on cooking sessions. The ACLM curriculum has 8 of their own, and then we added 2 extras with Chef Robert. These were all on Zoom, and we also added in some coaching, and I'll tell you a little more about that. We tried to have shadowing a dietitian, but that didn't really work well, and we used some recordings to have some lectures. So this is what the objectives were 4. One was we wanted it to be very practical. So we were having students cook in their own kitchens, and we wanted them to learn, what do they have in their kitchen? How do they use that? We also wanted to introduce evidence-based, and the ACLM has quite a bit of that. It really promotes a whole food plant-based diet. So we did not shame people for wanting to eat meat or other parts, but it's really a promotion for how can you work with patients and yourselves to start increasing your plant intake. And then finally, how do you translate this to patient care? So this is the curriculum for any of you that have seen it. It's an open, online, free curriculum. It has 8 lesson plans, and there's also a lot of good prompts. So the way that we would assign the classes is the students would pair up and teach one of the sessions. And we were, of course, there, but we asked them to prepare a short lecture. So they would go to the chapter, do the reading, watch the videos, and then they would present a PowerPoint. So by the time that we were done with the class, they had given 16 PowerPoints, and they could then share that with each other. These were 4th-year students. So this is what the schema of what a week looked like. You'll notice that on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we were pretty heavy on cooking. On Tuesdays, we had lectures, and we had them watch some of the pre-recordings. And then on Thursdays, we had a coaching session. So the initial part of the coaching was going to be students working with a dietitian, coaching real patients. We had some trouble with HIPAA and with Zoom making that happen. So we converted to one-on-one coaching. Each of us took on a coachee. We had them choose a goal that they wanted to accomplish in those 4 weeks, and then we did a session a week with them. And it actually worked quite well, but I will caution you, it takes a lot of time. Way too much time that we didn't actually have. So the final iteration, we combined, and we had groups of 2 or 3 coachees, and we did some group coaching sessions. That worked super well, and the students actually thought it was even better than the coaching we had before. So if you're thinking about incorporating coaching into any of your hands-on cooking classes, I would suggest doing it in small groups and then having them create a SMART goal and work towards something. The other funny part of this was we found many people, if given the choice, choose a family member to be their coachee when we asked them, why don't you find someone to coach? So now we tell them with a little bit of caveat, like don't pick your spouse and don't pick your parents. Because everyone said, oh, I want to tell my dad this thing. So coaching. This is the paper that we published, so you can reference it. And this is the much more detailed schedule if you wanted to see what we actually did kind of hour by hour, but it's the same schema I basically just showed you. And I like the title, Bringing the Joy of Healthy Eating to Advanced Medical Students. And as I mentioned, this was online teaching. So we actually learned quite a bit just from the online. And then in also promoting cross-discipline. So how many people are familiar with ACLM? Maybe just raise a hand. Okay, great. So I'm a pediatrician and I'm not certified at ACLM, but many of the tenets really ring true to me. We talk about a lot of these things often in our visits and with each other. So we realized that even though we were teaching cooking and nutrition, it was hard to ignore sleep. And it was hard to ignore talking about de-stress. And many students commented, being in the kitchen or being together helped bring my stress level down. Or I got home and as I was preparing dinner, I kind of mellowed out. So we found it was very easy to cross over and bring some of these in. So this is what our class looked like. Hopefully Zoom is familiar to everyone. But you see all of our little heads, some people with their camera off. I really like this person, Erica, who were saying, no, we don't want to see your face. We want to see your cutting board. And which is true, right? So we had to take a lot of time to learn how do you set up your camera. And we ended up sending out a one sheet and doing a little trial run with each student on how do you actually set up your kitchen, because many weren't that familiar with how they worked in their kitchen. And then you could zoom in. So when we had 3 people on, we had to have at least a minimum of 2 faculty together. 3 really helped because then you could have someone who was sort of driving the camera and spotlighting things. And so we could say, wow, look at this beautiful bowl of kale. And that's wonderful massaging of the kale. So we could kind of highlight others. And then this was in my kitchen, so one of the great things was teaching them batch cooking. So many students struggled with, I'm eating the same thing over and over again, or I'm eating a lot of frozen Trader Joe's foods. So we taught them batch cooking, and this is one of my favorite dishes to make, which is kind of a Moroccan curry, has a lot of cauliflower, a lot of spinach, you can see. And this was a lesson teaching about kind of medium dice, small dice, and mincing. And then we'd have dinner. So that was another nice thing for my family, except everyone's tired of that dish. If you've had that experience, right? Everyone comes home, oh, it's that class. And then this is just the results from our paper, which was really looking in for evaluation in 4 domains. So particularly their knowledge, you can see increased quite a bit. Confidence increased in their coaching of patients. Culinary skills increased. And actually behavior and attitude didn't change much. It's statistically significant, but you'll see that it didn't go up in that meaningful of way, which actually told us that most of their behaviors and attitudes were already pretty ingrained. And so I think we have some work to do there. And then we asked some more detailed questions. For example, I know how to saute foods. I have basic knife skills. I'm comfortable experimenting with new recipes. So we tried to encourage them to also stretch themselves in the kitchen as well. So a nice quote from one of our students who was going into emergency medicine said, he enjoyed the course, he wanted it to be part of the curriculum, and that he was going to have a lasting impact on his life and his patients. And I mentioned that he's going to ER because we had a lot of success with 4th-year students. They're really interested and said, I'm about to be a doctor. I don't know anything about this, and I don't know how to take care of my own self and cooking. I really think I need to learn something when I talk to patients. And the students were the best and have been the best promoters of the courses with our faculty and with the deans of curriculum. At your school, or maybe you found that what the students ask for tends to rise to a high level of priority. So finding a student champion was really helpful. All right, so what did we learn from the course? So one is the students loved it. We realized that we could actually make remote teaching work. We realized that it was a nice way to be in their homes. So I kind of call it being a guest in their home. It wasn't uncommon to be in their kitchen and then have a family member walk by and kind of poke their head in. Or we'd be making something, for example, we made some bruschetta, and then all of a sudden, the dad or someone would come in and say, that was really good. Like, what was that? And so there was this intimacy you don't get in a lecture hall or even in a teaching kitchen. So being in there really helped. It built community, even if it was on Zoom. And I will say it's even easier to build community in person, but even on Zoom, there were ways that we found to connect students who oftentimes hadn't been rotating with each other because they'd been in different sites. And we had really good student interest, as I mentioned. So I kind of said we have good soil. I've told our deans, like, we have really good soil, but we just need to plant a couple more seeds and add a little bit of water, i.e. money, and then things will get better. The other things we learned was that student engagement was a little variable. So I told you we had fourth-year students. That meant that they were interviewing for residency, and it meant that at times they would say, hey, I can't make class today. So you would prepare for a group of 8 and end up with 5. Sometimes people would drop the class last minute. So we had 8 students signed up, and then a week before someone dropped, and then we had to try and scramble to get someone or just go with 7. So it caused, from an administrative point, it was at times difficult. The students disliked the cost of the course. This was the first time that we did it. So we did this 7 times. We had a total of 41 students, but we realized that buying a little bit of saffron or buying sumac or something was really expensive. And then they said, we never use it again. And we said, well, that was part of the point. We were teaching you how to use this, that you would use it later. So how we adapted was Elizabeth, who is very kind, and said, I'm going to create a little sachet for each spice, and we're going to have the students come pick it up at the beginning of the class. So all the expensive ingredients, we bought a larger quantity and then split that up and delivered it to them like a little care package. They were much happier. So anyway, if you have a little money and time, putting something together for them was helpful. And I say that it's partially sustainable. After our 7th running of the course, we were pretty tired. And we also realized that we couldn't be the only 3 running these courses. So we needed to expand and find others who could take on some of this. So those were many of our lessons learned. I mentioned ACLM, and our students have really picked this up. So they started a lifestyle medicine interest group during COVID, and they started doing some co-curricular things with nutrition. And then we also have a nutrition student interest group. And I don't know if that happened at your institution, but during COVID, we had a lot of interest groups, students looking to do things. We also had a group called Keck Chefs, and I love this logo that they came up with. And the students have been running this. So it's an online cooking class. They just moved back into the kitchen. So I'll tell you about how we're now back in person, but now they're really running with it. So even though I'm the faculty advisor, they're buying the food and they're putting on the courses. So this was a fun picture that we took in our quad after one of our teaching sessions in the morning. So our lifestyle medicine interest group won an award from ACLM, and here we are doing yoga in our quad. And it's just a fun way to interact with the students, I will say. Okay, quick water. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what a group we have called the Primary Care Program. I mentioned Dr. Riley, Dr. Edge lead a program. So we have a large class, 186 students in each year, and 32 of those students self-select into a track called the Primary Care Program. And so part of that program is they spend more time in community clinics, and they now have some extra training in nutrition, both lectures, lunchtime lectures, as well as they work with our geriatrics department on geriatric care and nutrition. They also lead a hands-on cooking class over the lunchtime hour for the community. So I mentioned we have a teaching kitchen, and in that kitchen, you can see that they're mic'd up, and he's actually broadcasting from the kitchen on Zoom. We have some food models, and then we have a chef, Chef Pablo, who comes in and creates a dish. So it's a little bit of hands-on cooking, but it's more of a demonstration. And they now have been doing this for 3 years, and they have really good participation. Oftentimes it's half in person, so maybe 20 people in the room, and then another 20 on Zoom. And they tried to evaluate this, recently published a paper called Virtual Community Nutrition and Exercise Classes, Barriers and Opportunities. And what they found was that people really do like the online classes. It was a lot easier for childcare. It saved them a lot on transportation, and they found like they still got the learning. People did like to come in person, but that was a good alternative to do it on Zoom. And as I mentioned, we have required scholarly projects. So students are still continuing to work with us on trying to present either nationally at posters. So it's a great way to find students who want to have a little bit of experience with research and pick something in the field that you're working in. And then I mentioned that they do cooking classes. They've also started doing exercise classes. So people will come for 2 hours. The first hour is a nutrition class, and the second hour is an exercise class. And you can see we have a nice Zumba studio next to the teaching kitchen. They recently published a cookbook, so you can find it on Amazon. It's Healthy Eating and Cooking. What I love about this is all of the proceeds goes to providing the books to the participants who come to class. So we live in Los Angeles, we work in East LA, we serve a relatively underserved population, mostly Latino, and so it's a bilingual cookbook, and we're just trying to encourage people to cook at home. And mostly that came because they were asking for the recipes all the time, that they finally said, you know what, we're just gonna make a book so you have them and you can take them home. So, okay, towards the end, let me talk about how we've implemented the Health Meets Food curriculum. So I came here a year ago for the conference with Dr. Beal and Dr. Wallace. We trained on how to deliver these sessions, and we've now adopted the first session, Module 1, for all of our students. But we started as a pilot program, partnering with the School of Gerontology, where our Department of Nutrition sits. And I know in talking to some of you that nutrition may find its way in different schools. At ours, it happens to be in gerontology. So we have a class where we offer the Module 1 for 16 students and then 6 dietetic interns. And it turned out that one of the dietetic interns said, you know, I used to run a small shop, a cooking shop, and before I came to become a dietitian, and I'd love to do more. So she's now become kind of the lead dietetic intern, and she has been absolutely fabulous. So if you find somebody who has extra skill and interest, she's doing, in essence, a practicum with me. So how she's been super helpful, for example, she said, I think we need some induction burners because everyone is standing around the same stove. And I said, that's great. And she said, I'm gonna do some research and find some so that I can give you the best one to buy. And I turned around, she found ones for $100. We purchased them, and I've never seen a bigger smile than when she showed up the next time. I was like, wow, we already got them. I said, yes, thank you for doing all the research. She said, I'm gonna find you some pans to go with these induction burners. I said, perfect. So I'm trying to raise the money, and she's finding all of the wonderful equipment, and it's made a huge difference in the way the class is run. But you can see happy students wearing masks. The mask mandate was just lifted in our kitchen, so we can now eat in our kitchen, which was a huge thing, and also you can see them smiling. So this is the Module 1 in picture format. So we call it Spaghetti 4 Ways, which is each group. So one group makes a sauce that's all meat-based. The other is half meat, half veggies. One is half meat with lentils, and the final one is all plant-based. And not only is it delicious, but I love this because it's very accessible to people. They're familiar with spaghetti and meat sauce or some red sauce. And the message, at least as I teach it, is that, you know, if you have a patient who is eating a lot of meat and you want to tell them you should incorporate more plants, you don't have to go from meat straight over to plants. And we talk about not removing things from your diet, but how can you add things? So how can you add fiber? How can you add vegetables? How can you add color? And the students have really resonated with that. They said, oh, I'm just gonna add a little onion and some more, you know, vegetables to the next time I make this. So I love this course. Part of the setup, as I mentioned, having an induction burner really allowed us to create a station to make the whole wheat pasta for everybody. So we moved people off of the kitchen. We set up these individual cutting board areas with box graters, and then we still use the stovetop. There's also a lot of prep involved. Sorry, one last thing. So as you saw today, or when you came, there's trays involved, and you partition out everything. So we now come an hour early, and we oftentimes have a student helper as well as a dietetic intern, and we get all of the trays ready for each group. At the beginning, I thought, wow, this takes a ton of time, but it's really well worth it because it makes the classes run a lot more smoothly. So you can see here that we set up a tray for each group. And then some happy students cooking lentils. I had one student tell me, Dr. Harlan, I don't even know what lentils are. I said, that's fine. And he said, I've never even seen lentils. Is that what they are? And so we found another student who said, oh, I'm gonna come show you how to cook them. So they were cooking themselves, which, you know, just really warmed my heart. So trying not to judge, you know, everyone is at a different level. And then we would go outside and eat, and we found a nice patio. Part of what you may find in some of these classes is there's a ton of community building just sitting together and eating. And we started to invite a third or fourth year student to come and teach the class with us, but also found then everyone was gravitating to that student to ask them about medical school. And there all of a sudden was this mentorship that came out of coming to a cooking class, but providing some peer mentoring. Now we can eat in your kitchen. Here you see, again, happy students like I'm sure you have, and more of the same. We also bought these nice buckets to start getting all of our equipment together. And we found that when you buy one large bottle of olive oil, you can use that for several classes. So the cost has actually come down as we've gotten more organized with what materials we actually need. So now I have to keep inventory, which is something very new to me. But fun. We also, so Health Meets Food has a lot of pre-recorded lectures as well. And we asked the students to watch some of the lectures, particularly this one that we placed in what we called our CPR block, or cardiac pulmonary respiratory. So we introduced concepts about homeostasis and nutrition around the DASH diet and hypertension. I teach in the Intro to Clinical Medicine course, so we teach them how to take a blood pressure. And it was really nice to then be able to transition and say, you know how to take a blood pressure. Let's now talk about what are some of the dietary approaches to maintaining that blood pressure. And then finally, here's where we are now. So we just applied for a $20,000 grant from our school at USC for interdisciplinary teaching. So we're already doing this with the dietetics students, and we're hoping that we can now kind of have the money to improve our equipment, to buy more food, to offer the course more often, and also offer some training for some of our teachers. Our goal is to offer this Module 1 to all 186 students, as well as the interns, the dietetic interns. And we propose then offering the second module on Zoom as a follow-up. I will say we thought this was a slam dunk, like we all love this. And we took it to the curriculum committee and they said, why is this required? And we said, well, this is really important. They said, but I want my course to be required. And I want my part that you told me is now optional to be made required again if you're going to make cooking required. And I was sort of taken aback. Luckily, it was on Zoom, so you can like turn your camera off for a moment. And so they said, like, whoa. But I just realized like we have to make a really good argument as to why does every student need to know this? So even though we maybe think it's important, it's really the messaging, and we're still working on this. So as of now, it's an optional course, but we're going to offer it enough times that all of the students can attend. We're also looking to partner with a local group called Common Threads, and part of their mission is to provide community cooking in elementary schools and high schools. And so we're working with some of our medical students who want to do more community service to interact with the local elementary schools. And as I mentioned, they have a community service requirement now. And so many have asked if this could be part of that service requirement. So there's a lot of good interest in all of that. I mentioned our student interest group. We just had a talk on the blue zones. And they were, many didn't know about the blue zones, or many were wondering, well, how does that translate to patient care? So they're also asking for a lot of things. How many people actually here work in like the clerkship world, third year or fourth year medical students? Yeah, okay, good. So some people. So this is something that we're trying this year, which is at the beginning of the pediatric clerkship, students would come and they would say, I'm really afraid of kids, or I'm really afraid of parents, and I hope they don't ask me anything. I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, I'm just afraid they're going to ask me for advice on breastfeeding or what to feed my child, and I have no idea. And I said, that's totally reasonable. We wouldn't expect you to have a lot of background. And so we decided to, at the orientation, give them a quick overview of general nutrition and then break out into 3 small groups to learn about infant feeding, breastfeeding, toddler feeding, and kind of older healthy habits. So we just finished our first cycle of doing this. We tried to make it very hands-on. So I was thinking about Dr. Sharma with the peanut butter puffs, where we have to ask now, is anyone allergic to peanuts before we open this bag? Luckily, so far, no one has. But we want them to taste, like what are we actually feeding our kids? We have not opened the baby burrito bowl, but they joke with me because I say, you have to at least show that there's such a thing as a baby burrito bowl. I've never seen. And then recently we were approached by our internal medicine program director who said, I know you're doing cooking classes. Would you do that for our residents? And I said, I think we can. And he said, and I can probably find some money to actually help buy the food. And I said, yes, we can definitely do it. So we did this online. The trick was getting the residents together. And so what they did was the internal medicine residency department bought the food and then had the residents pick it up and take it home. We did it on Friday afternoons, so 3 to 5 p.m., and we did 3 sessions. And so the first session was hummus, baba ganoush, and crudité, teaching them also the skills of mise en place. And that went really well, and that was accomplished in 2 hours. The next one I thought was a little ambitious, and I've never cooked with leeks, so I was a little nervous about this, but Chef Robert said, don't worry, I will take everyone through it. So we made a fennel, lentil, and lemon soup, which was quite good, leeks and bok choy with vinaigrette, and kale and avocado salad. And then the final one was tofu scramble, almond butter filled dates, sweet potato chili, and quinoa. And so you could see even in 3 sessions, we covered a lot of different types of foods and a lot of different techniques, and the residents loved it. So here's a picture of all of us cooking. This is actually Chef Robert's cutting board. So we learned how to use 2 cameras, have one on your face and one on the cutting board, and then you see us all working away. And what was also fun is several of the residents were medical students at our school. So then they later commented, why didn't we have this in medical school? And I said, okay, can I get you on record to say that so that we can go back and say, see, even our residents want this. So anyway, but it was actually relatively quick and easy to put together. And again, this is, for example, in my kitchen, I had to figure out, how many books do you need to make the laptop the right height? And how much of a mess can I make? How much do I have to clean up? No one in my family wanted to eat the leeks or the bok choy, but oh well, that's what we had for dinner. And all right, so hopefully what I covered is importance of the student voice, find some students who really can help rally with you. It's incredibly fun to mentor some of these students. If you can create electives, that's a nice way to introduce something sort of at a low cost place that might fill the need at your school. Try and get some things into the core curriculum, but again, we were prepared that there is a little bit of battle for the limited time that you have in the core curriculum. If you can work in the community, it's incredibly rewarding, and particularly with dietitians, we think there's a lot more synergy that can happen between physicians, dietitians, and medical students. COVID for us really taught us how to work remotely, and I know many have figured that out, but it's definitely achievable, and I think any of us would be happy to share some of those tips. And then finally, just planning for where you are and always looking forward, who else can help support you. I've learned, for example, and this is Chef Pablo, some of our things. You can come to some of our classes that are online, and then, well, there's my final slide.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
You're a Harlan. Why don't we do this? Is this mic hot? Test. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to grab some chairs. I'll speak with you. So our panel discussion starts at 1:15, and we're going to be having folks from across the spectrum. Don't go anywhere, Greg. We're going to have folks speaking from across the spectrum, including our skills building folks, et cetera. I'm going to just start and maybe have you kick off with a couple of questions that people asked. And if you've got questions, again, for Dr. Harlan or anybody else this morning, any of your skills building folks today, whether you were in baking or with Chef Leah or Chef Barbara, if you've got questions, they're going to be up here on stage. And I think sometimes for those folks who didn't get to go to the baking or maybe didn't get to do the oral allergy syndrome, asking those questions and opening that conversation can help a lot. So there's a couple of questions here, Greg, already for you, and I'm going to turn the mic over to you, and I'm going to just give them to you.
Okay.
And let you maybe start answering those questions while we do some logistics and chairs and that sort of thing. Sound good?
Sure.
Since we got a little
I
extra
think I'm
time?
still actually on this one.
Okay, perfect.
So how are you getting funding? Good question. My dean wants a premier program, but not willing to give the money. Yeah, so I think, so this is, I have two thoughts about this. One is for getting funding, I've always tried to approach getting small amounts, kind of proving that the program is potentially doable and then sustainable, and then trying to find larger pools of money. So we started with $5,000 that helped to buy initial knives, cutting boards, some general food, and then from there, now as I said, we're looking for more money, $20,000 grants. I think it's sitting down with your dean and figuring out what a premier program looks like and what that means, because there's a lot of models out there, and I could help one-on-one to point you to a lot of schools, even people that are likely here, that have made a lot of progress in whatever the premier program looks like. So hard to know. I don't know if someone wants to elaborate a little bit on that. The other thought is also alumni. So I mentioned Dr. Wallace is an alum, and he said, I could help get our alumni to each chip in to offer some of these classes, and they may want to come cook alongside the students as well. So we're looking at how do we involve our alumni who also have some money and have some interest in the course. There's another question about HIPAA challenges. What was your solution to HIPAA concerns related to online classes with actual patients? Yeah, it's a good question. So what I meant was we wanted to have our students with a dietitian working with a patient. So the dietitians were counseling patients via a HIPAA compliant Zoom, and we couldn't quite figure out if the students were at home, if they could remote in and how to make that work, or if they had to physically go to be with the dietitian to be on the same spot with them. I think ultimately that we realized that they could Zoom in and both join the HIPAA compliant, but it was hard to schedule the students and the patients at the same time with the dietitian. So we ultimately kind of gave up on that idea. I think the other question was around funding. All right, are there other questions? Can I go from the audience? What about my salary? So who pays for my salary? So good question. So I have different sources of funding, some from the Department of Pediatrics. So a bulk of it comes from medical education, because now I'm running a course, and so that's the bulk of my salaries from that. But I've now worked to get part of my FTE as incorporating nutrition, so as a nutrition champion. So I think part of it is figuring out what title you want to have, or what we needed someone to have a little bit more time to devote to it. So right now it's, I think, 0.15 FTE to dedicate to nutrition. Yeah. So was it hard to find dietitians or chefs who are primarily plant-based? Not really. And also I sort of moved away from like insisting on plant-based, but just being more plant-forward or familiar with more plant-based. There's a lot more chefs than, I just didn't know where to find them. So it's really word of mouth. And I've mentioned that Chef Pablo, who helped write the book with Dr. Riley, he said, oh, I'd love to come. And he's at a stage in his career where he said, I'm not here to make money. I really want to give back to the community. So we're still going to plan to pay him. That's part of our $20,000 application, but not a lot. Yeah. Sorry.
So I have a question from online. Two questions. First is, how do you get to the website for the curriculum? culinarymedicine.org. You can reach out to us, and we're happy to talk to you about the Health Meets Food curriculum and what's available, how we help get people trained, how the curriculum is used. And for those of you who might be in food service, there is, as I mentioned earlier in the day, programming for culinary schools as well. So we're happy to have that discussion with any of you. So how much time do you think you estimate this has added to your schedule each week to handle the culinary medicine? And while you're answering that, maybe Chef Jay, Leah, Chef Hoberson, if Dr. Green's in the room, y'all can maybe come on up for the panel discussion.
So how much time do I spend?
Yeah, about what's your time commitment for you?
I think it's about a half day a week right now that is spent on, figuring out when we're offering classes, trying to work with the administration to get students signed up. Right now we're planning for next year, so we're planning the schedule. When is the teaching kitchen available? The other is working on the evaluation piece. So we sent out evaluations to the students, but we're having a low response rate. So we're trying to follow up on that piece. So about a half day a week, I would say.
So what do we got? We got Dr. Green, you want to come on up? I think we've got just enough for the musical chairs. Carrie, we're going to need another chair, I think, for Chef Barbara when she comes. Is that right? No, I think we'll be okay. And if you have questions, again, for any of our chefs, the skills building folks, Chef Barbara, Chef Jay, Chef Leah, et cetera. And I think that some of those extend to the nutrition piece as well. Leah's Chef RD, as is Barbara. I'm going to kick off with, this is directed at Dr. Sharma, but I think that it may be something for Greg to think about answering also. It says, Dr. Sharma, many attendees are in the process of, or actually operating teaching kitchens for diverse populations. Any guidance or recommendations towards standard anaphylaxis management toolkit for the kitchen space, additions to EpiPen, any kind of training, et cetera?
It's a great question. I think, as I mentioned, some of my research looks at disparities in food allergy based on race, ethnicity, and socioeconomics. And what we're beginning to learn is that some of these disparities could be related to just gaps in knowledge, gaps in access and gaps in knowledge. And so part of what we've been trying to do is to implement interventions all throughout our community that target populations that may not know as much about food allergy, may not know as much about culinary medicine. Just this past weekend, we had a program in Anacostia, which is in Southeast DC, and this was a community access initiative organized by our hospital along with FAIR, which is the Food Allergy Research and Education Organization. And the intention is to educate about food allergy because part of the reason that there are disparities is because there appears to be disparities in knowledge. Just to give one example, from our research, we found that the age at which food allergens were introduced early in childhood differs by race and ethnicity. And so Black and Hispanic parents were introducing foods later. And the reason was because they didn't know that the guidelines had necessarily changed. And so part of our responsibility is that when knowledge advances, we have to make sure we make that information accessible. But I'd love to hear from Jeff.
Greg, challenges in your program? What have y'all done anything with your community programming yet as far as anaphylaxis, et cetera?
No, it's actually giving me pause to think about. We should address it.
This is great. So we keep an EpiPen on hand, and we do have instructions in our safety and sanitation module about EpiPen and administration of it. I think that's module 26. There's also the instructions for how to use an EpiPen, like you were talking about earlier. Fortunately, I will say, in the 10 years since Chef Leah and I started doing this, we collectively, between our time at Tulane and our time at GW, have had one injury. And that was Leah, actually. So, we've not had any community members or med students with any significant cuts or anything like this. This question was actually, I think it was maybe for Dr. Green or Dr. Sharma, but I'm not going to ask it of Dr. Green or Dr. Sharma. One of you mentioned finfish this morning, and what do you mean by finfish? Leah, Carrie, Leah, Barbara, you want to talk about finfish?
No.
No. Define fin
Who's the
fish.
fisherman?
Yeah, exactly.
I mentioned finfish.
Okay.
So there you
I
go.
want one of the chefs to answer the question.
And so do I.
All right, here we go.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Aaron Poporeskin. Finfish, it's kind of all in the name. If a fish has fins, it's a finfish. That would be, separate from shellfish, for example. That's a pretty easy one. I don't know if you guys have a difference of opinion on it. Salmon, trout family fish, bass, snapper, grouper, cod family fish, anything in the tuna bonito family, Kampachi, amberjack, those are all finfish.
And this is a question. Yeah, so there's finfish, then crustaceans and mollusks. Right. That's mostly what we eat. Crustaceans are pretty closely related to cockroaches. Somebody asked a question. I'm sorry, because somebody asked this question. It wasn't me. I'll see if I can find it here. But it was for you, Dr. Sharma, about if someone has a cockroach allergy, is there any cross-reactivity with shellfish and crustaceans? I think it's a great question.
Yeah, we talked, I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier today, but yeah, so tropomycin is a protein that's found in the shell of cockroaches and dust mites and is also found in the shell of crustacean shellfish. And so one of the interesting things, again, related to health disparities is that the prevalence of shellfish allergy is actually higher in African American populations, and the prevalence of dust mite and cockroach allergy is also higher. And so there is a correlation due to that cross-reactivity, and oftentimes individuals will be allergic to the airborne allergen first, the dust mite or the cockroach, and then go on to start having some symptoms with shellfish afterward. So it has some relationship with oral allergy that we were learning about earlier today as well.
So I'm going to continue with a couple of questions. This is for both. This came in earlier today for either Dr. Sharma or Dr. Green. Is there any utility to commercially available, and it says, quote, food sensitivity, end quote, tests, because that's a pretty broad spectrum, I think, in the marketplace.
It's so interesting dealing with people who have food issues. One often sees patients, they bring in a folder about that thick with color coding of various food sensitivities based on various testing. And, when one feels polite and got a couple of minutes, you kind of look through each page and then file it. And if you haven't kind of hit it off well with the patient, you kind of just file it. And, so we're really taught that there isn't any commercially available food testing. They come under different names, but we don't think that they have much validity. What's your comment on that? Because you must see a lot of that.
Yeah, agree. We do see a good amount of it, and often it's the, for example, the food IgG testing, the panels of IgG antibody testing against a variety of foods to look for sensitivities. And what's interesting, I was mentioning this to someone else earlier, when we're doing clinical trials of food allergy treatments, let's say the oral immunotherapy for peanut, one of the things that we notice is that as they become desensitized to peanut, their peanut IgG goes up while their peanut IgE goes down. And so IgG is actually just a marker of being able to tolerate a food. And so unfortunately, it's marketed in many ways as being indicative of some sort of sensitivity or intolerance, but the NIH guidelines are very clear, NIH food allergy guidelines are very clear that we shouldn't be relying on those to make recommendations about dietary avoidance.
And Chef Jay, what do you guys do right now with respect to training your prospective hospitality students, chefs, et cetera, on food allergy, and how are you training them to kind of help us out?
Right. Well, thank you for the question, Dr. Harlan. And it's so important that our students, when they're moving into the industry as leaders in hospitality, whether it be in the travel or tourism or restaurant or any of these related fields, it's so important that when they engage with consumers, that they know how to handle allergies in situations where we may have, guests or clients that, you know, have one of many different sensitivities, allergies, and any of these things. And, you know, we have to be able to communicate with them, make sure that all known common allergens are very well identified in menus, very well known to the frontline service staff that's going to be engaging with the public, so that they can communicate, be careful, be aware. Never, you know, and another thing, when we're creating menus, when we're developing recipes, it's very important that we don't hide allergens in things. And, you know, a menu description, for example, should include common allergens, so that these things are not something that you find out when you take the bite and your tongue starts to swell, right? So it's all about communication for us, and avoidance of cross-contaminants, as well as cross-contact of allergens when we're preparing food. That's another one. The same thing that, you know, we sanitize our stations and our cutting boards to avoid pathogens, in much the same way, we have to be training our team members about cross-contact, and how even, you know, just a little bit of residue from an onion, for example, on a cutting board, which in, you know, the general scheme of things for preparation, we'd not worry about that. But if someone has an onion allergy, and that board is not properly sanitized in between uses, cross-contact, now we have someone that has a hidden allergen. And so that's something that we try to watch out for as best we can. But I think really the key is communication. Communication with staff, communication with the public.
And so I'm going to segue from there to some a little bit of culinary stuff with our chefs on the stage now, and get some preferences. This comes from an online, somebody who's online right now. It actually was directed at you, Barbara, and it says, do you prefer, quote, light olive oil for sauteing? And I think that's a really great question. So what does that look like for you? And I don't think there's any olive allergies that I'm aware of.
Never heard of it.
No? Rare? Yeah.
Not the top 10.
Thank goodness it's rare, because we'd be out of business.
So the answer is, I never ever saute in good olive oil, meaning extra virgin olive oil. If it's green, it will burn. And if it burns, it imparts bitter. And if you were with me earlier, bitter's icky, right? And so, yeah, I use either a blended olive oil. So the one that I get is a olive oil canola blend, which I quite like, because the canola has a really neutral kind of flavor. It's inexpensive, so the oil itself is pretty inexpensive. If I can't find it, because I can't always find it, it's like a elusive brand, I'll just use either canola oil or a light olive oil. So an olive oil that's like at its third pressing. I don't use pomace, which is the last pressing, which is kind of the garbage version of olive oil. So I don't use that. It's like one or two above that. But I think that, you know, olive oil is beautiful, fruity oil. Use it for its beautiful fruitiness, which is finishing.
Leah?
I think that the more it's filtered generally, the more heat it can withstand, because it's particulate that burns, right? So your extra virgin olive oil is at first press, especially if it's unfiltered, it's gonna have a lot of particulate that can burn. And a lot of olive oils, especially second press or more, when you get lighter, can withstand up to 400 to 450 degrees. But like Barbara was saying, do you wanna waste a perfectly good olive oil? And I'll add, health-wise, canola oil is actually quite high in monounsaturated fat. So it is another good option that I like to cook with as well.
Jay?
Yeah, and I agree. The better the quality of the oil, the less I'd want to heat it. You know, I mean, virgin oil has a beautiful flavor. There's a nuance to it. There's some spice, there's some complexity. If you're sauteing with that, you're going to burn the oil. First of all, the smoke point's, you know, much too low. And it's also a waste of money. I mean, it's expensive oil. You know, the more refined oils, and I agree, a canola blend is a good way to go, higher smoke point, neutral flavor. But, you know, those more expensive oils for finishing, you know, for flavor, you know, the beauty of it is actually tasting it as it is in its natural state, not adulterating it. and then it's kind of the same thing. There's certain types of butter, I know, that, you
Butter's
would
okay.
bake. Well, I got to be careful. But, there's certain uses, there's certain uses where I'd heat butter, and there's certain uses when I wouldn't. Soft butter, I'm not going to fry with, unless I want to brown. And sometimes just a little pinch does that. But usually, clarified butter if I'm actually going to be heating it. And then, it's just like we say, everything has its purpose, and, there's a good tool for every job and a best tool for every job.
Chef? Our baker? At least our baker today.
Baker today. I have maybe a slightly different approach. When I think about what oil I'm cooking with, I think about what I want the end product to taste like. So olive oil, I actually saute with olive oil all the time and cook with it frequently when I want that flavor. I'm not too worried about the bitterness, the greenness, the heat from it, if it's something I'm shooting for. I love that with seafood, which I would saute, but at a maybe lower heat and for not as long. However, if I do not want the flavor of the oil translated to the end product, then I'm going to use something totally neutral like grapeseed oil, sunflower oil. I love canola oil. Rice bran oil is a great choice. And there are also hypoallergenic peanut oils you can choose from. So for me, it's what do I want the food that I'm cooking to taste like? If I want to impart flavor with fat, I can do that with a more flavorful oil. If I don't, then something neutral. Rapeseed's an amazing choice. High smoke point, tastes like nothing.
Can I say one thing? I think that's a really good point. If you've never tasted your olive oil or tasted your oils, I would highly recommend that. I mean, they're very nuanced depending on the region. It's just like wine, some are more bitter, some are more smooth. And thinking of the application or what you prefer, if you've never tasted what you're using, go home and try it and see if you actually like it, because you might find a product that you enjoy more, or maybe you're like, hey, I've been doing really good this whole time.
Yeah, there's a clear-cut difference between Spanish olive oil and Greek olive oil and Tunisian olive oil and Italian, because they're different olives. Yeah. And I like Spanish olive oil because there's sort of a grassy flavor in most Spanish olive oils that I kind of like in my olive oil. We're going to go from a benign subject, olive oil and oils, to one of my favorites. We had a little bit of discussion about it at lunch, and that's to revisit. Could you talk more about leaky gut being a, quote, natural state? I think that this is, there's a lot of unfortunate pseudoscience, as you said earlier, around, quote, leaky gut and what it means. We were talking about the size of the molecules, et cetera, in some of the work that you've done.
Yes, so the topic has really taken over a lot of non-traditional medical folks' time. We do tests of intestinal permeability in which we use sugars, and sugars transmit through the bowel, both through the cells and between the cells. It was a really big eye-opener to me when I learned only in the last couple of years that those large gluten molecules that are 33 amino acid long peptides readily transfer through the bowel wall of normal people. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a sandwich out there and then go out the back and pee, we pee out these little gluten molecules that are toxic when they get activated on by the enzyme tissue transglutaminase. So the concept of a leaky gut is how we survive. The immunological cells in the bowel sample the proteins, and it develops our tolerance to them. And these proteins come through and interact with our immune system and allow us to survive with these foreign proteins, food, infections, etc., in the bowel. And so we tolerate it. So a leaky gut is a normal phenomenon that allows us to live in this world. And it's not a pathological state at all. There are some disease processes in which there's more transport of proteins through the bowel wall. And so the gut can become leakier, but that's a pathological process. But it is a physiological process that these proteins will pass through. And the size of those chains of amino acids is multiples of a sugar molecule that you can measure to measure intestinal transport. So
I think it's a really fascinating subject because it's one of those things that gained a lot of traction in the same way that wheat belly diet and, all of this sort of pseudoscience, and it has some foundation in science, but not necessarily foundation in pathology is, I think, the challenge.
That's exactly it.
So this is, I think, for both you and Dr. Sharma, maybe we'll start with Dr. Sharma about, it says, when introducing new foods in infancy, how much time would you wait between the new foods? I mean, how much are you going to, sort of phase that in? I think at the same time as the pediatrician, maybe can answer some of that on the practical sense. And then you mentioned earlier, kind of thinking about that also, Dr. Green, about gluten early in life versus later in life, et cetera. Dr. Sharma?
Yeah. So with food introduction, the current guidelines say to try one food at a time, which the rationale for that is to identify if there is an allergic reaction, you can isolate which food caused it. And so typically 3 to 4 days is sufficient to be able to identify that. Now, with this current recommendation to try to introduce all the food allergens early, sometimes we get the question, well, is it 3 to 4 days per specific food or food group? Because you could take many, many, many months if you're trying to do 3 to 4 days for each different kind of yellow fruit. And so really for the top allergens, that's where we feel it's most important from the allergy perspective to isolate it. But from a practical standpoint, and I'd love to hear your advice as a general pediatrician.
Is that only when there's a history in the family? Or you're talking about all children?
Ideally, all children. And the reason being is that most kids diagnosed with food allergy these days have no family history. And they're the first child in the family line that has had an IgE-mediated food allergy. So it is ideal if the parents can, for those 9 foods that we said were the top 9 food allergens, to do them one at a time. But, curious with gluten, what you would recommend, Dr. Green, and then also Dr. Harlan.
So so the people that are most interested in this are those in whom they've got a family member and they don't want their kid to have to develop celiac disease. So if the child never ate gluten, wouldn't get celiac disease, even though it'd be at risk. So, but that's totally impractical because if 10% of family members, 8%, 10%, that means that they've got a 90% chance of not having celiac disease. So it's cruel and unusual to withhold that, to my mind. So we've gone around the full circle of timing of gluten introduction. For a while we were telling people to give it during the 4 to 7 months period because we thought that that was going to be protective, but the studies didn't show that. So currently we just say that gluten should be introduced as per the pediatricians typically suggest it get introduced.
So we always punt it back to the primary care doc, right?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, it's like, go see your internist.
I love that the allergist funded back to us. That's nice. No, I mean, it's very similar. I think we focus on what you said, the 9 more typical allergens. We'll say be a little more careful, introduce those one at a time, but others like carrots and other things, you can be a little more liberal. And I use it as a point of teaching when talking with the third year medical students about look how things have changed, exactly as you outlined, that when I did my training in pediatrics, that we said, don't give your kids peanuts till forever. And now it's completely different based on the LEAP study. So, just showing them that things will change and evolve even as they're training.
I just texted my daughter during your lecture about her 4-month-old child, like, when have you started peanuts? Yeah. So what kind of parent are you?
The LEAP study used, and I can't remember which of your slide decks, the LEAP study used the little peanut Cheez-Its, like the Israeli peanut Bombas. Do you want to just talk about Bombas real quick? Has anybody ever had these Bombas? A few people? You want to talk about them really quickly? They're freaking delicious. Barbara,
I use them for fun.
Exactly. Finish my ganache with a topping of Bamba.
So if you read the LEAP study and you don't know what they are, they're basically like Cheetos, but made of peanut. And they're super delicious. Like they're absolutely fantastically delicious. You can order them from Amazon. They're made in Israel, interestingly. So before we leave some controversy, if you will, there are a lot of questions here for Dr. Green and or Dr. Sharma, potentially Dr. Harlan. I'm going to read a few of them. Do you believe that glyphosate has been a factor in increased prevalence of celiac disease? There's another one that mentions GMOs, food additives, processed food, and food allergy. Increase in prevalence coincides with the past 75 years of industrialized agriculture processes. So not just the processing of the food, but the agricultural processes. And then the other one that you mentioned, actually, Dr. Green, which was heavy metals. And so I think there's a lot of these ideas that are correlative maybe, but not necessarily causative, as far as the idea of processed food versus heavy metals versus different agriculture.
Yes. The amount of wheat consumed in the United States has gone down over the last 100 years. It's probably half of what it was 100 years ago, which is interesting. The amount of gluten in wheat varies with rainfall and the quality of the wheat. Something that we don't know very much about is this vital gluten. Vital gluten is imported in the country from all the wheat growing countries, other countries, and it's used, and there's no quantification of the amount that's imported. And I don't quite know when that really started, but it is available. You can go buy vital wheat, and apparently when you buy a bread making machine, they give you a bag of vital gluten. So in response to the other questions, no, yes, no, and no.
Okay, I can't remember which one it was here.
And the other thing is they put Roundup on potatoes, but no one is worried about the potatoes. They put Roundup on wheat. Everyone's worried about the gluten in the wheat. So,
interesting. So it's really, you think it's really only the heavy metals that might have some influence? No, yes, no. Sorry to put you on the spot, man.
The heavy metal issue is actually a bit of a problem and is related, I think, to the rice, because rice absorbs heavy metals. And it depends where the rice comes from, actually. If the rice is grown on the old cotton fields, then apparently there's a lot of heavy metals in the earth.
A lot of arsenic. And I wrote a paper recently with Rob Lustig that Barbara, I really made Barbara mad. Please do not go read this paper. Because it does go over a lot of heavy metals that are in things that we particularly love. So I think it extends well beyond, but you don't think there's an influence there in triggering celiac disease or even allergy with the heavy metals piece?
I don't know anything about that, actually. I'm not sure. I'm worried about all these products that you put in food, that makes it highly processed. Something that, being a gastroenterologist that deals with a lot of celiac disease and IBS type symptoms, what's very common is people say, I travel to Europe and I feel really great. I come back to the United States and I feel not so great. And to my mind, that could be related to the high fructose corn syrup that gets added to all the food products. Like growing up in Australia, we had something called tomato sauce in a bottle, which was like vinegar, tomato paste, and salt. Here you have ketchup that I think is vinegar, tomato sauce, and high fructose corn syrup. So it's very hard to avoid high fructose corn syrup. And when we test for fructose intolerance, it's very, very common. So
back to some cooking questions. And I think this is an amazing question. How do you battle burnout when it comes to cooking? Do you have advice on creating convenience around healthy eating? Leah, you're smiling, so you get to answer that question first.
Yeah, so just like getting kind of bored of doing the same, or I don't know if they meant specifically the time, or, I like to challenge myself personally into trying new things, but also I have to balance that with being an adult who has a full-time job and all these other responsibilities. So believe me, at home every night, I'm not cooking a gourmet 4-course meal, I'm doing like a protein and a vegetable. And then I might have more fun on the weekends and holidays and when other people do it. But for me, I sign up for a CSA, which is like a farm share, which if you've never heard about them, you probably have one in your area. It's when you get a box of what's available that week. And it gets me out of my comfort zone of the things that I go for all of the time. Into making new ingredients. You might get a head of romesco and you're like, what's Romanesco, sorry. Romanesco, yeah, romesco's a sauce. And be like, what do I do with this? And then when in doubt, roast. That's generally the answer. But you can find new and creative ways of using these ingredients. And for me, that's one way that I keep things interesting in the kitchen. And then I just do a lot of reading and education. I find people that I like to read. I find chefs I like to, follow their cookbooks and see what they're doing, and I'm not afraid to try new things, even knowing I might fail, and you shouldn't be either. It's how we learn.
Barbara?
Don't cook for a 10-year-old. Number one. Definitely the CSA. I love my CSA because I get weird stuff. Like where I'm like, I gotta Google this because I don't even know what it is. Like, what does one do with this thing? It was a great way to really push you out of your comfort zone. And just like Leah said, when in doubt, roast it and put garlic on it. A little bit of salt. I think eating out is also what keeps me from having burnout. So I love all ethnic cuisines. And so I will try them all, and then I'll come home and I'll think, I could do that better, right? I could do it a little healthier. I could not maybe deep fry it. I could maybe, not make it so salty or so sugary. I could figure out a way to do this even better. I think that keeps it fresh for me. I'm really curious about cuisine from around the world, and really like, what is that weird thing? Let's see. And where does it take me when I smell it? Where does it make me like, what goes with that? And I think reading and having, I have a huge cookbook library, but you don't need those anymore because the internet is your friend. There's tons of people out there writing about food and just jumping off what they do, and not being afraid, right? So like, what's the worst thing that happens? Like, you don't like it? Okay.
So I'll answer that also for myself. I actually like my rut. I have a saying, don't blank with my rut. It was one of the first things that I'm taking Spanish. It's one of the first things that I had my Spanish professor teach me to say. I like my rut, and it's pretty interesting that most of us, and there's some good data around this, most of us have about 20 recipes that we love. Like there's about 20 recipes that you can probably sit down and start writing out. Maybe it's a mac and cheese recipe, maybe it's a taco salad recipe. And in my house, it's risotto, it's a fried rice recipe that we do, it's a taco salad recipe and tacos. And so we generally do those a couple of times a week, one of those a couple of times a week. And then we do some batch cooking on the weekends. We make a big pot of stew, we teach this a lot in the programming about making some chili and repurposing it for other things, making nachos, et cetera. So I would almost say, from my standpoint, embrace the rut. Because it just makes life easier. It's like, I love going back to taco salad. I probably could eat taco salad every night of the week, but I don't. So this is, again, kind of for our chefs in the room, but Maybe also if our physicians could think about this from a clinical standpoint. I'm going to start with you, Chef. But since you do this for a living, I mean, you make healthy food for a living. Is an R&D chef. Do you have any guidance or recommendations for resources on developing recipes targeting chronic disease? I mean, what do you turn to when you're thinking about the recipes that you're creating?
Okay. I could talk for a very long time about this, and I'll try and keep it short. So first things first, when we're targeting a chronic disease, an aversion, an exclusion from a diet, I try simply to focus on that. If gluten is what I'm not allowed to deal with, then I'm not concerned with is it low in sugar? Is it vegan? Is it plant-based? I'm just solving for replacing gluten. And then what I do is you could write a list of all of your usual suspects, your tools that you'd normally reach for, cross them off. And the amazing thing that we don't acknowledge often enough is everything else that we have in our repertoire. And I liken this to circumlocution when you're learning a new language. You might not always have the word that you want to speak, but you have 10 other words that you can use to communicate that same message or that same meaning. And it's true in cooking also. What Dr. Harlan means when he says, I work in R&D is I'm a product developer for consumer packaged goods. And in many different types of products. The one that kicked me off was I had a company come to me and say, we want you to make a frozen food for kids, like a Totino's pizza roll. It has to be gluten-free. And actually, they gave me a number of restrictions. No modified starches, no gums, nothing that's not paleo. Can you do this? And I thought to myself, well, I have no idea how to do that. But what I said was yes. And then I started to analyze what do I like about gluten? What do I like about wheat and the way it interacts with water? What do I like about bread? How do I achieve the attributes in bread that I like about it? Well, gluten does a few things very well. When those two proteins, gluten and gliadin and flour, bind with water, they create a really strong web. It allows them to catch a lot more water. And the best breads have what we would call an open crumb structure. If you slice into them, you see big open bubbles, a wide web, nothing closed and dense. And that's because that gluten trap allows that bread to hold water. It allows that water to expand and steam and evaporate and then hold that structure. So I was looking for a way to replicate that. And I began looking at other starches. I found two. I found cassava, which is the unrefined flour of a root, and tapioca, which is the refined starch of that flour. I found that tapioca could hold an enormous quantity of water, but it was impossible to work with once it was hydrated. And that just because it was too adhesive to everything, it needed something to be worked into, and it could be worked into cassava flour, and then it was no longer adhesive. Okay, so that's one thing. It trapped water, but how did I get it to become elastic? Well, there are other proteins you can do that with. Egg white is one of them. And so it wasn't by one ingredient, but rather three that I was able to replicate the properties of gluten into a gluten-free dough that could hold a lot of water, that could be stretched thin and sheeted and actually extensible. It's the opposite of elastic, ultimately. It doesn't pull back, and then could be filled. And that took me about 12 months to figure out. So it's not so simple, but a big part of that process was looking at ethnic cuisines. And where else in the world do we see different types of bread that might resemble a sourdough or a baguette? And what I found was pão de queijo from Brazil. And pão de queijo is made with tapioca flour or cassava flour, and it's extremely chewy, which is something we love about bread. It creates a great film. And that film is the product of either a starch or a protein, and it becomes crisp. And so I thought, this is a great food of a different world culture. Let me try and apply that thinking, that methodology to the problem I'm trying to solve, which is a pizza pocket. And if it doesn't taste like pizza, well, hell, I can always add dehydrated mozzarella, tomato powder, and oregano to it, and it will taste like pizza. So So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Leah?
Can I say it from a more, that's amazing, by the way. I mean, I just learned a lot. From a more general kind of chronic disease standpoint, when I think of, diabetes or heart disease or any of the types of things we come across every day, it's not as difficult as you think, because I'd say in general, they're all just gonna be a healthier Mediterranean diet. And when we start like trying to hyper-focus on each of those diets, you're gonna end up with a different meal for every person in your house. So I have a kind of set standard of where I want my recipes to be, and I just have all my recipes adhere to that standard. I like about how much salt. I know about 1/8 a teaspoon per portion in general, unless there's a lot of salty ingredients. I know I'm aiming for more fiber. I know I want more fruits and vegetables. That's generally the answer, more fruits and vegetables. And I want to incorporate whole grains and legumes and wherever I can. So I don't hyper focus on those things, except there's always exceptions, right? Kidney disease can get very finicky. Someone has something like PKU, oh gosh, that's its whole diet by itself. And there's specific products just for that. But I think in general, we just eat a healthier diet, eat more fruits and vegetables, eat more whole grains, eat a Mediterranean diet, and you're going to meet the needs. Because those people that have the chronic diseases, trust me, what you're making at home isn't where the problems are starting. You're making food using whole grains, fruits, vegetables, olive oil, good proteins. That's not the reason, that's not going to make their chronic disease worse generally. Now, if you're just doing ultra processed food all the time, yeah, that's going to be more of an issue.
Chef Jay?
Yeah, I was very impressed with everything I've heard with, by the way, that research, oh my goodness. But for myself as a chef, I try to focus on balance. I try to focus on portion control, and I try to focus on quality of ingredients. If you stay away from the processed foods, the chemically based foods, and you focus on high quality ingredients, minimal adulteration, and that's key, you will keep all the nutrition that you'll need. The more you adulterate, the more you add, whether it be a starch or whether it be added sodium or whether it be, any number of things, and you get away from what I feel is really the heart of the ingredient. It's more about the process than the food anymore. And I think if we keep the food as the star of the show in the center of the plate, use high quality ingredients, and use restraint sometimes on some of the things that we want to do that might lead us to too many calories or too much salt or whatnot. I think that we can always have a nutritious, healthful, and delicious meal. Minimal adulteration, though.
Yeah, I think you can make it super complex, but in general, that sort of healthy Mediterranean diet, less land animal protein, more seafood, more fruits and nuts, more whole grains, more legumes, more veggies, better quality oils and fats as the foundation. I think then you have those specific cases of a patient with celiac disease, a patient with food allergy, but otherwise for chronic disease like heart disease, diabetes, et cetera, it's pretty much one diet to rule them all. With the other exceptions where you want to modify for pregnancy, you want to modify for other specific conditions. Real quick question, Dr. Sharma, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm not 100% certain I do, which is good. Are people who are allergic to peanuts also allergic to peanut oil?
Oh, very good question. It depends. So it actually depends.
Of course.
It depends how refined the peanut oil is. So there's different hot pressed, cold pressed. To give an example, I don't know if I'm allowed to name brands. Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A happens to use a very refined peanut oil. And so the vast majority of patients with peanut allergy can actually tolerate their peanut oil. However, there are other brands that use a more crude peanut oil that actually does have a decent amount of peanut protein in the oil. And I definitely have had patients with peanut allergy react to that oil. So I always, as a general rule, advise trying to avoid peanut oil because you really can't find out in a lot of ways how refined or unrefined it is. But if a patient does happen to want to try it, I just advise caution because there is a chance of it being crude enough that it could cause a reaction.
Excellent, excellent.
Is that the same as what
but
you thought?
there's no real way to know that. I
There's
think.
no
I mean,
real way to know that.
You walk
so
down the
it's-
grocery aisle and you really don't know.
Correct. So the safest is to avoid it. Is that what did you think the answer was?
I thought that was the answer.
Okay, good. Phew. All right.
But you know, I'm often surprised. I learned so much from both of you today that I could have come up with a completely different answer. But I think it's the same thing of you know, there's no standard, right, of how refined that oil. Just as unfortunately there's no standard for supplements. You know, you have no idea when you walk down the supplement aisle if that garlic, it probably doesn't actually have garlic in it because that would be too expensive and they wouldn't make any money. So real quick, this is about advising patients on how to interact with their families. The question is, and I think it's a pretty broad question, it's what advice can you give on telling patients on how to speak with their families about a healthier diet when there may be a cultural or other general pushback? And I would think that you guys both get this in the allergy, in the gluten world, pediatric world. I know I get it as an internist. Dr. Sharma, how do you work with that with your patients who have allergies, but then have to work with their families?
Yeah, the example that just flashed to my mind is grandparents, in particular some of, I can say this, ethnic grandparents who may not necessarily understand or respect the fact that this grandchild is severely allergic to a particular food. And I oftentimes will encourage the parents to bring in the grandparents so that we can sit down and talk about it. Usually, the first time a child has a severe reaction, and that family member sees it, they get it. And then their mindset changes and they completely understand how serious this could potentially be. But you know, there's all kinds of beliefs that I think oftentimes just require a little bit of education, understanding, empathy, and oftentimes, you know, seeing it as believing, but as, you know, clinicians, we can also help with some of that education.
Dr. Green?
It's kind of interesting to ask an individual if the other family members are supportive. I've always thought that, like, if a woman has celiac disease, it's her problem. If the man in the family has celiac disease, it's her problem as well.
But is it the other way around?
No, the burden falls on the woman in the family. And, you know, they're often just left to work it out. The guy just eats what he's served type of thing.
I think it's an unfortunate thing, whether I say this all the time, probably at least once a month, whether we like it or not, for the most part, women are still the gatekeepers of the kitchen in America. So appealing to them, I will say as an internist, I will speak to it from a pediatric standpoint, from a different perspective maybe, sometimes not just trying to say to a wife, how do you help make your husband healthier? But I have really taken to, with my patients who are not healthy, I take to appealing to the fact that and they have kids, that they're maybe also making their kids unhealthy. I don't really like children, don't want to be a pediatrician, don't like taking care of children. I'm glad there's pediatricians in the world, thank goodness. But it's an opening for me as an internist to be able to open that door to talk with them. How do you do it, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, we treat it as it's a family question or concern. So if someone is concerned about how much soda their child's taking or, you know, drinking, I just ask, well, who's buying the soda? And usually it's the parents who say, you know, I buy it and I like it too. And I'm like, oh, you didn't say that part. It's all about the kids. I mean, it's for all of us. So I use kind of a motivational interviewing framework. So really asking when people say, I wish I could be healthier, or I wish we exercise more, you know, that's change talk. And how do we then talk more about, well, how can we help move you to this next state? You know, what can we do as a family? So I try and focus less on the individual child and more on the family as a whole.
So I'm going to begin wrapping up. I want to get to one of my favorite topics, which is non-celiac gluten sensitivity.
I've got to leave right
That's why I kept it till last, Dr. Green.
Thank you very much for having me.
I've gone back and forth for the last 20 years. I am now on the side that there is a phenomenon of non-celiac gluten sensitivity. It says specifically, can you speak more on non-celiac gluten sensitivity? What do you think the mechanism behind it is? Is it the gluten? Is it other stuff, the pesticides, et cetera?
So, there's conflicting information out there. Like, we obtained serum from Italian patients that had non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and in some of them, somehow we had serum before they went on a gluten-free diet. And we compared the results of a whole parameter of testing, and in some of these individuals with gluten sensitivity, there was an increase in intestinal permeability, evidenced several ways that was not present in individuals with active celiac disease. So I have that bit of information sitting there, but all the clinical studies in which they've tested individuals with gluten, it's been the fructans as part of FODMAPs that have been causing the symptoms. So non-celiac gluten sensitivity is a FODMAP problem, a fructan problem, or because there's such a high placebo rate of symptoms, it's a rice problem. It's whatever the placebo you used is also causing symptoms. So, but it's very difficult to do food challenge studies because patients get symptoms when you change the food. Like if they go from gluten to gluten-free, they get symptoms. From gluten-free to gluten, they get symptoms. So the presence of symptoms is very difficult to assess. But the evidence is that it's the fructans that are causing the symptoms. Now, when we see people with gluten sensitivity, you can go through all the things, if they're perfectly happy, what we think is very important that they see the dietitian to make sure that their gluten-free diet is a healthy and varied diet. Because people who restrict a food often eat the same stuff all the time because they know it's safe for them. So we've got to encourage them to eat whole grains. People who restrict gluten don't eat whole grains. So we've got to get them to eat the healthy foods in addition.